Hello, I am Tulip Chaudhary, welcoming you to episode 6 of my show, Hourglass Trails. Dear viewers, I hope you are all enjoying this fabulous weather. Although strange weather patterns bring us very hot days, but I don't think as New Englanders we really mind having scorching heat over us, because we know down the way we may be under piles of snow. So warm weather is always welcome to us. And through the whole year, do we not wait for spring and summer and all the bounties they bring? All that sunshine, birds, flowers, bees, butterflies, and all that kindles our thoughts. Poets, musicians, and other creative workers get busy. They open different windows, look through the nature. And striding along them, we are going to look into some amazing poetry today. And today I have Adam Ortiz, who is an educator and poet, with me to share his amazing poetry. But before I go into that, I would like to express my thanks to Amherst Media and the great team for making it possible for me to host my own show. This has been a long dream. So thank you. And now I'll move on to Adam. Adam, thank you very much for coming to my show, and very, very welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. So if I may ask you, how would you introduce yourself and your creativity of poems?
I think more often than not, I don't think about introducing myself as a poet, but as somebody who really appreciates poetry, really loves to write poetry. I think for me, I don't feel like I have enough. I don't want to say I don't put enough emphasis on the title of poet, because I don't do it professionally, and yet it's part of what I do every single day to a certain extent. In the same way that I wouldn't call myself, a chef. I love to cook every day. I don't feel like I have come to the place of claiming the title of poet, whereas I think, it's still integrated into my everyday kind of actions and thinking. So it's a really big part of my life. But yeah, I have not come to a place yet of claiming the title, but we'll hopefully maybe get there someday.
Oh, but cooking is also an art, isn't it?
It is.
It's a kind of art, but I have listened to your poems at Bridges where we met, and I really loved your poems.
Thank you.
So, but I wonder, to be called a poet, do we have to go into publication and have a big name? Aren't we all poets to some extent, each and every one of us?
I think that's a complexity that I've been trying to work out for about 20 years. I started writing poetry when I was about 15 years old, and I'm 34 now. And I remember even when I was 15, 16, thinking to myself, but am I a poet? Am I not a poet? What is a poet? Is it somebody who's been published? Is it somebody who, has been known for centuries? Is it somebody who's written their first poem? And in some ways I feel like it's really up to the person doing it to decide for themselves. But it's a really great question, and again, one that I, after thinking about it for decades, don't have a really solid answer on. So I feel like as long as the poetry keeps happening and the writing continues, that's what really matters.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I also think so. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be big names or to be spread out, because many of us write amazing poetry,
right,
but many of them don't really want to be published. They do it for their own joy that brings to create the words and the rhymes and the expressions they give. It's for their own joy. And I know many people who don't really express themselves to others. They keep it to themselves.
Right.
So, Adam, as we know that cakes are best fresh out of the oven, right?
Yes.
So let's listen to some of the poems you have. I'll be honored if you can share some with us
Absolutely.
today.
And being a millennial, I'm going to read it off my phone because that's a convenient way to do it.
That's okay, perfectly okay. This age is like this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So this is one that I recently wrote, just kind of thinking a lot about this season, after the winter's over, when things start to kind of come alive and things feel a little bit more optimistic, I think, for a lot of folks. And so it's untitled, and I'll read it. There is a supernatural optimism, a parallel universe where everything just works out and warmth like fire that cannot be extinguished or destroyed or rained into ashes. A breath of cool air, a healing fog, a huge smile, and planets that spin wildly in space, solely to remind us to believe and hope. Stitched into our favorite antique books' spines and film cells and spoken words. Your fear-riddled monster shadow basements, tear them down completely. Collect water from the storms and drink to your resilience. Yes, you. There is a sunrise, a giving sunrise that will sail you safely to the morning, strong, impenetrable, and self-confident, where you can stretch the years from your muscles and wash your bones in the light-filled, heavy relief-soaked fury of now.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
Now, dear viewers, don't you think this is a perfect poem that calls for hope? We are at a time when there's so much unrest in the whole world, and we really are hoping for the best in future that's coming to us. Now, Adam, I would like to ask you about the poetic moods that often we talk about, the inspirations. So can you tell us about how and when is your best time to write and what makes you write the poetry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for me, I am somebody who is a really big believer in the subconscious. And after many years of sitting down and trying really hard to write good poetry, kind of came to a place of understanding that the best work that I was able to write came when I wasn't trying so hard to make it good, And so I'm somebody who really very much believes, for myself at least, that the better stuff needs to kind of come out of some part of myself that I can't actively always access consciously. And so I like to create conditions where I feel like good poetry will happen. So sometimes I'll sit down and just start typing and typing and typing and typing and typing and typing for 5 to 10 minutes. And occasionally I'll get, 3 or 4 really great sentences or good visuals that come out of that. Sometimes a whole poem will come out, and that's always really exciting, but that's not always the case. There have been times when I've written a poem and the end is really bad, and I'll take a nap and think to myself, all right, like while I'm going to sleep or when I wake up, I really want to try to find a great ending to this poem, and occasionally it will happen. So for me, that's how I tend to work. I think that there was a quote I read recently, and I don't remember who said it, but it was something to the effect of inspiration finds the person who's working, that you need to work towards something, and then inspiration will kind of come to you. So you don't just sit there and wait for it to come, you actually have to work toward it, but really it's that inspiration that brings you your creativity and your gifts.
Thank you. Yeah, you are exactly this creativity. I mean, as far as we know, many of us create in different ways. There are musicians, there are artists, but not only them, even homemaking is an art itself. So to a basic sense, we are all creators.
Absolutely.
In a way. We create something. And creation of poetry is in the words. When you talk about creativity and poetry and the inspiration, it's funny to think how poetry came into being. I mean, from the earliest history of poetry, poetry came into being as a means of memorizing
Right.
Law, history, and sometimes even singing poetry to memorize them, because just word itself didn't work out. And then we came into great epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. And then there was Mahabharata and Ramayana. So all these are epic poems. But the earliest poems that I also read are, so we had to count syllables, rhymes, and it really scared
Yeah.
answer. I mean, I too thought like, I can't write poetry, it's tough. But over time, poems and poetry has formed its whole formation, changed, right? Like there are free verses, and there was Sufi poems, and there are even nonsense poems. They're called limericks that makes little sense, but they're very strong in grammars. Do you have anything to share on the changes that coming over the field of poetry?
Yes,
Can you share something on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I really struggle with contemporary poetry, both online and in print, is that for me, I feel like oftentimes we're in one of two buckets. I feel like there is an incredible amount of people writing very novice poetry that's good, but sounds like how you would expect poetry to sound sometimes. It can be very flowery, very, symbolism and words and images that are extremely common, and that's really wonderful. Like, I feel like the internet has created spaces for people to write and share, and kind of begin, their journeys there. And then I feel like there's also the extremely inaccessible, academic, hard to read poetry that sometimes makes me feel stupid for even trying, and I struggle with that too. I feel like oftentimes you're kind of at one or the other when you go searching. I feel like what I would like to see and what I really like in terms of writing, is poetry that just has more fun, and is a little bit goofier.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, I love the absurd poetry. I love limericks. I think the word poetry carries such a heavy history behind it that people are intimidated by it, and I mean, you can write a poem about a fly that lands on your kitchen table. You can write a poem about a time when you had to stay home sick from work because you had a cold. Like, you can really write anything. I think that for so many of us, it's just about reframing, how do you start to look at everything in life as either a poem itself or, imagery that you can use for poetry. And some writers really do a great job with that. And I feel like there are very few of them, unfortunately, that I've read anyways.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, these days we are so much taken up in a hectic life, and we want poetry to be something more lighter,
Right.
more fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
But talking of internet and social media, it's a huge site, isn't it, where we can really look into all kinds of poetry. And not only as writers, as readers, we get different view because we get feedbacks. If you write, you get feedbacks. It's amazing how it's working between your readers and you writing and the feedbacks you get. I mean, really, there is no comparison to the social media, the internet that's taken over our lives.
Yeah.
So do you use any kind of social media and internet to write where you are spreading around the whole world?
I do, actually. I have, it's kind of funny, but my primary core, I'm somebody who needs affirmation from other people when I'm writing, that what I'm writing is good, because I'm somebody who will get into my own head and think to myself, oh, this is terrible, whereas somebody who, can step forward and say, no, this is actually pretty good, or maybe if you made these changes, this would be really helpful. I need that. And so I have, there's actually a Facebook group that I'm a part of that's run by a friend who lives in the local area, and it's about, I think there's 35 to 40 writers at any given time who are in this group. And, every week people share questions, they share their poetry, they share prompts, they, there's just a lot of dialogue between the poets. And it's amazing because it spans the spectrum of people who, write just once or twice a week, and that's kind of what they do, to people who are full on, have published, lots and lots of books of poems and things like that. And so in that regard, having the internet and having that ability to connect with people who live in Australia, who live in Canada, and be able to really think together and work together is an amazing gift that I know people have never had before.
So it's poetry. Would you like to share another poem with us?
Sure.
Whichever comes to you right now to read.
Absolutely. So this
Thank
is one that I recently wrote that I really liked. This is probably my favorite poem I've written this year so far. So hopefully you'll like it as
Yeah,
well.
I'm sure I will.
All right. I want to steal bags of great words like a black and white gangster in a film noir bank robbery. I want to hang them on my sentences like white Christmas lights on a Victorian mansion in the summer. I want to host a poetry party, serving the martinis with literary illusions bobbing around in frosty glasses. I want to swim in an ocean of books, half worried about getting devoured by ferocious bad grammar. I want to write stories that land in your hair like golden evening sunlight. I want to be a more compelling author than anxiety. I want to sleep nestled up in pages next to an alarm clock that's too courteous to wake me up before the best parts of the story.
Thank you. That's amazing. Talking of writing, I hope this forceful voice when you talk about yourself, say I. Do you agree on that? I mean, I often, even in short stories and prose, I have found when you talk from first person, it creates more forceful voice. Do you think so? I mean, I found this poem amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do, and that's something I've actually been thinking a lot lately about, is kind of like, I think most people, when they first begin reading and writing poetry, assumes that it needs to come directly from you as the poet, or that it's coming from the person who wrote the poem, so we look at a lot of historical poets and think, oh my gosh, they must have been going through some serious psychological stuff or whatever, and that may not have necessarily been them speaking directly from their personal experience, but more so storytelling, and at the same time, I'm also somebody who believes very strongly that anything you write is probably coming from some little piece of who you are as a person, even if it's not directly related to your life experience. I think sometimes we write in metaphor and in ways that kind of show who we are, if not directly. And so, yeah, I think especially poems that make very declarative statements and sentences can be very forceful, and it can be a way of giving yourself a voice, especially for people who don't feel like they've always had the ability to express it.
Yes, I agree with you. There are, some poems that are socially and politically motivated.
Yeah.
Many things you cannot voice otherwise, and these are voiced through poetry.
Yeah, absolutely.
First time I heard your poetry was at Bridges Coffee House, an open mic where Dorothy and I host. And I was wondering we have been hosting that for quite a while, and we share all kinds of music, art, anything that we come to share. But in terms of poetry and as a local Amherst, do you think we have enough venues where we can share poetry?
I don't think we can ever have enough venues in which to share poetry. No, I mean, I actually recently connected with some folks over at the Emily Dickinson Museum, and was talking to them about the ways in which, they're hoping to continue growing their groups of folks who come to their poetry readings, and more people coming to Bridges would be great. I think it's one of those things where people can be very intimidated by the prospect of, going to, even as just a spectator, but especially as a reader, any kind of poetry reading space. I feel like there's a lot of insecurity around people, performing and reading their poetry for others. So I think what I would love to see in Amherst and just in general are spaces that, cater to everybody's tastes, so poetry readings in bars would be great. Poetry readings in public parks would be great. In churches would be great. I think any opportunity to give people voice in whatever area they feel comfortable would be really amazing. And it's not a hard thing to do, fortunately. It just takes folks, taking the initiative to put it together.
Yeah, exactly, to put it together, you're right. And when around 3 years back, there was one group who used to do every first Friday at it was then Rhea was the share coffee.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to a couple of them, and that was amazing too. I mean, you were at ease. You didn't feel like pressurized to do anything very difficult poem or perfect. You just did your own expression, and that's it. And everybody sharing was the great there. Now coming to writing poetry, I mean, there were days when we picture poets writing, and because it's not perfect, throwing away the papers until the room is half full with crumpled papers. So how do you usually write? Do you write it straight on the computer, or do you sometimes use pen and paper? Because I have seen many people who still cling to the pen and paper because it seems to give them more thoughts. Something happens that they feel more when they're writing the pen and paper. Would you like to share something how you write?
Absolutely. I mean, I started writing initially on pen and paper when I was a teenager. And I remember actually, I used to be very intentional about making sure that I had beautifully written cursive because I thought that that would make my poems better. And I go back and read them now and I'm like, my handwriting was great. I don't know about the poetry, but I was glad that it helped me work on my penmanship, you know. And then as I got older, I remember actually when I moved to Amherst, there's a typewriter store downtown, and I remember I went and took an old typewriter to have it fixed there because I was thinking maybe that would make my poems really great if I could type them out on a typewriter, you know. That was fun for a couple of days. You know, it didn't really improve my poetry. It just looked kind of cool being, you know, hand typed. Honestly, I think that given where I'm at these days, I have a 16-month-old son who is a wonderful inspiration. And, you know, just the realities of working full-time, I don't prioritize sitting down to write as much as I should. And so I do the bulk of my writing on my phone. Which is great.
That's perfect.
It is. It's extremely convenient. So in between meetings, when I'm getting ready to go to bed at night, you know, when I wake up first thing in the morning, if I have an idea, no matter what, I always have my phone by me. And so that kind of has become my go-to, where I store pretty much everything. And I used to be resistant to that. Now I just embrace it and I like it. And it also keeps my poems a little shorter and more concise.
To go with the flow.
Exactly. Exactly. Do what works.
Yeah. Do you happen to have that wonderful poem I heard about your son?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to listen and share it with our audience.
Yeah, this was one that I wrote about my son a few months ago. I think you're wonderful. I don't have many things figured out, but I do have that figured out. So believe me when I tell you without the slightest hesitation, you are wonderful. And I hope you spend the rest of your life being told by other people that you are wonderful, because you are. I hope this world affirms that you are wonderful, this complex and changing world. You will grow up in a different one than I grew up in, and sometimes that scares me. But I know that you'll do fine, because you're wonderful. I hope that you find faith in it, and I hope that you find peace in it, and I hope that you have fun with it, and I hope that you will trust me the day that I tell you to put down your phone and watch the sunset, breathing in the evening air and wondering just how big it really is. I hope you find truth in the healing magic of other human beings, despite the innumerable ways in which they can hurt you. I hope you explore every inch of your kind soul and your beautiful brain. I hope you read and write narratives that make you excited to wake up in the morning. I hope you shovel scary nightmares out your window. Listen to me closely when I tell you that you will need to fight hard to stay enchanted, to see miracles, and some days just to get out of bed. But nothing is as important. Listen to me closely when I tell you that believing in radical love and optimism will allow you to see grace pouring from words, from people, from hours that you do not have the time to waste. And lastly, I hope that when you meet someone you think is wonderful, you tell them.
That's awesome, and really, you have really traveled into time, isn't it?
Yeah.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, poetry these days seems to be like anything that's expressed and shared. It has lost all its, must and do's and don'ts.
Right.
There's a free website where I write Hello Poetry, and when I see into those poems, these are amazing because it's the really contemporary, the latest kind of poetry that really captures me. Sometimes it's full page. Poetry is supposed to be a little bit light, but that's the poem. And then that reminds me of the Iliad and the Ulysses, that felt tired, and it seems we are going back to that again.
Right.
And when you want to, some people can put it into 4 words, and other people can't express their, even if feelings, even 2 pages, 3 pages, but we still call it poetry.
Yeah.
It's just feelings that we share with the whole world, our emotional world.
Yeah. I've always felt like, I've always been a fan of the shorter pieces. I feel like you can, I feel like if you can really express something in a shorter, you know, like a shorter constraint anyways, I feel like that's when you feel the most heavily hit most of the time, you know, and I really like that. And that's not to say that there aren't wonderful, incredible, really lengthy pieces, but I feel like for somebody to, you know, commit to reading and picking apart and understanding something that is so long, what you're saying really better have an impact, you know, because I think, especially given how fast-paced everything is, I don't feel like most people devote the time to sitting down and really taking in all of that. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but I think it's the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's. I think so, because the person who is writing is a person. It's an internet, and you have free access. So they just want to be expressed. So however it comes.
Yeah.
And we also have, as readers, choices. Do you want the shorter version? Do you want the longer version?
Yeah.
But it's all together, that's sharing life with words.
Absolutely.
So I think we are coming to the end of our show. And Adam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It was amazing listening to your poem. Is there any place where we can have a bigger access to your poems?
I just started recently not publishing, but I recently started posting poetry on a Tumblr page, which is just adamortizwrites.tumblr.com. And so the majority of my stuff that I've written recently is there.
That's amazing. I shall try to find out. I'll find it out, I'm sure, because I love your poetry.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. As summer comes with more and more colors, I hope you experience the nature and the bounties and the life around you in poetic or non-poetic modes. And thank you very much for being with me today. And thank you very much to Amherst Media and its great team for capturing Adam's amazing poems. Till we next meet again, keep hearty and well and enjoy the summer.